way I'm reading it. And Anita, welcome Anita, and Phil.
Mr. Chair, do you want us just to swing into it?
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Councillors, you all know Anita, I think, but do you know Anita as the new Head of Public Law, acting for the time being? Well done.
It's just been announced, so...
Good introduction, Anita.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
No pressure.
So, was contacted this morning in relation to a discussion you've had earlier regarding the PwC report and media comments, and there were a number of questions raised verbally, as I understand it, and subsequently a number of questions have flowed through from different councillors. I'd start by saying I think the best thing is that we have a look at this in a measured fashion and respond to the written questions in writing as soon as possible today, which we will do. But if we could just talk to the general issue, and by way of summary, and sorry for going over stuff that was canvassed a little bit in some of the conversation earlier, but councillors were previously provided both redacted versions of reports and then also given access to unredacted versions of reports, but with certain conditions around that, all born of the need, well expressed at the time, for confidentiality, and that was in relation to some non-disclosure agreements, generally some sensitive confidential information, validly so, in the reports, and also the specific requests of one party, Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei Whairawa Limited. And I think that history is generally well established. Now, the fact is that there were a significant number of redactions in the report, in the two reports, the PwC reports. Some of them related to questions of the location of site, and some of those redactions related to other matters entirely. So it's not as simple as to say that because statements have been made in the public arena, therefore the whole of the reports should therefore be out in public. It needs a more measured look to establish whether that still holds or not. What is true is that one of the reasons for redactions related to location of sites, and in that there have been statements made in the public arena disclosing at least one of those locations. Some of the argument for confidentiality may have gone in that respect alone, and therefore we need to carefully go through and look at that question. That's the appropriate thing to do. Now, my suggestion to you is that we do so and follow up in writing in due course. In the course of looking at this, just in the last couple of hours, it's important to record that the comment by one councillor traversed in the New Zealand Herald is not the only statement in recent days and weeks which effectively discloses aspects that were confidential in the report. So we need to have a look at that as well. Now I'll ask my colleague just to cover off in a little bit more detail aspects of that.
Through the chair,
I've been asked to provide some comment on the non-disclosure agreements and whether or not they remain in force and binding. There are various non-disclosure agreements which relate to the two PwC pre-feasibility reports. Those remain in force. We now need to take a look at those agreements and the information in the reports and the circumstances and consider that. But for now, we recommend that you continue to treat the information as confidential and not comment. I'd also like to note that we haven't heard further from Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei Whairawa Limited about their request to keep the information in the reports confidential. They wrote to RFA on 2 different occasions to express their concern about any information in the reports being released. We haven't heard from them that their position has changed. So again, for that reason, our advice to you at this point would be to continue to treat that information as confidential and to not comment. Phil quickly mentioned, and I would just like to expand, in relation to the information that's in the reports. All the information that in those 2 reports has been subject to a great amount of very careful consideration and analysis, including scrutiny by the Office of the Ombudsman. We will now need to review the information in the reports and in the current circumstances, or we can advise you further, and so we'd like to provide that to you in writing.
Phil, anything else to add?
No, there's now by email and otherwise a long list of questions, and I think, as I say, rather than sort of going through all of those, I really do suggest that we respond to each of them. Yep. And my suggestion would be that we do so to all councillors, rather than just the requester.
Yep. And by when?
It'll take a little bit of time to go through the reports. I think a lot of the questions we can answer today, those that relate to the question of the extent to which the report can be, a different version of the report can be released in acknowledgement of what's been said publicly, we probably need at least a day to go through that. So we'd be talking tomorrow night.
And is there a need for any of your responses to come back in the confidential section or something of a meeting?
That's a possibility. I should note that I'm quite sensitive to the fact that this is still a live investigation by the Ombudsman, and we need to have some discussion with them because they may have a view now as well, and that's a factor that has an influence on how this is handled.
And that was brought up by Councillor Watson, Amanda. So I've got nothing else to say? No. Councillor Newman.
Yeah, thank you. 2 questions from me. Firstly, how many non-disclosure agreements have been potentially breached?
The potentially is correct because that needs to be looked at.
How many
carefully.
have potentially been breached?
I would need some time to look at that.
Mr. Wilson, you made the comment that the information as reported is not the only comment in relation to effectively disclosure. What other comments are you referring to? Because in the absence of specifics, I feel that remark casts a shadow on those of us who have not deliberately or accidentally provided information in the public domain as per the disclosure by Councillor Darby.
I'm most particularly referencing a comment from the chair of Ngāti Whātua Whairawa himself, Michael Stiasny, in the Herald on the 19th of October.
But no, I'm talking about elected members.
And I wasn't talking about elected members.
Okay, so it's only Councillor Darby, no one else. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. My only question is as far as I can see, the comments made 2 days ago were the same, as far as I can see, comments that were made or by the same journalist on the 23rd of May this year in the Herald on the sites and different things. So I guess there needs to be an issue on what is already in the public domain, what is not, how that got out in May potentially. So I just want to know where the line is, because sometimes it's about whether we're pretending things are out there or not.
And this question has arisen over the last few months in terms of whether a further iteration of the report should be made more publicly available. And the key difference here is that on a number of occasions in the media, there has been speculation as to sites and other aspects of stadium location, etc., but none of those have been confirmed by somebody in authority referencing the PwC report. Okay, that's the key difference.
Okay, and any other councillors? Councillor Lee.
It doesn't relate directly to the questions raised earlier that Mr. Wilson is dealing with, but it does relate to the particular site. And that is on the 13th of February this year, after an earlier meeting, the Planning Committee resolved to abandon a protected view shaft, a long-standing protected view shaft across this particular area. At the time, there was quite a strong debate, and the leading voice for abandoning this long-standing view shaft was the Mayor. The fact of the PwC report and what it contained was known to him, but as I understand, no one else. I am concerned about that sort of practice.
I think I do remember the issue. I think there were a number of people championing that, but I can't comment any further. Any further questions? Councillor Casey
One more.
and Councillor Watson.
Phil, when you say we, who do you mean? We will look at it. Who is it in this council that decides, A, what the councillors can see, and B, what the public can see? Who does that?
The specific responsibility rests with the Chief Executive, some of which is delegated through me, and I do so in liaison with and on advice from our legal department.
So this is prompting you to have another look at the report with regard to public release. Has it made you have a different view on the release to councillors? In full, without conditions?
We will look at that, yes, although I do make the point that councillors did have access to the unredacted report. I take the point that some people have taken issue with the conditions put around that, but at no stage was the information itself withheld, at least in the second consideration of that.
Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, just a clarification of the apparent revision and what that means now coming after the fact, i.e. the article and the statements have appeared, are out in the public domain. Obviously, that's quite a separate issue from what has transpired already. So, from what I've heard from you and from our legal advice is that the expectations in terms of the restrictions, confidentiality, non-disclosure clauses are in operation as we speak, and that was clearly the understanding that was imparted to councillors as a whole. And any subsequent examination that you're talking about now is in light of the fact that various things, not least of which this article this week, have gone out into the public arena. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Councillor Newman again.
Yeah, I understand from the nature of the article that it is now understood that there has been a deliberate disclosure and it references back to the PwC report, which is different from the previous debate, which has never been confirmed. The other question that I had, and I'm not sure if it can be addressed here as a matter of process, Chair, because this report will have to come back for resolution at the governing body, or there'll be a mechanism for something like that. The other comment in the report, which I find curious, is the remark the council has already turned down a request for funding. That is in relation to the request from the consortium for funding. What is the mechanism that leads to that decision being taken? I agree with that decision, but I wasn't party to it, or I don't believe I was party to it. So what is the mechanism that leads to the council turning down a funding request? Or has that been incorrectly reported?
As Chair of Finance, I certainly had nothing to do with that. I believe those people have seen the Mayor with a presentation and have seen Councillor Hills and Councillor Darby with a presentation, and then at the planning committee. So,
well, Chair, the difficulty I have with that is that the sentence preceding that reads as follows. Darby and Clough each ruled out providing ratepayer funding to test the National Stadium. Next sentence. The council has already turned down a request for funding. What is the mechanism that results in that decision being taken? By whom and when was it taken?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, to the best of my understanding, no formal request, or actually even any informal request to me personally, has been made for that funding. And my understanding of the comments in the article was that two councillors were expressing their view that that funding ought not to be provided, and there is nothing remiss around that.
Okay, so that will be that we should read that differently from the revelation of the sites earlier in the article, because that definitely does represent the PwC discussion.
It's a different issue.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I certainly was not asked by the reporter about have you turned them down or anything like that. I merely said it's a long-term, it's an LTP thing in 2021, end of story.
Oh.
And no favouritism for anyone, you know, we wait till then. Councillor Fletcher, sorry.
Thank you, and in my comments and my questions I want to make it quite clear that I have no criticism being directed to you personally or as chair of the committee on this matter. I suppose we had a discussion earlier today on the importance of transparency and under agenda item 8, and I suppose what I want to say, and to quote Churchill on this, is with great power comes great responsibility, and information is power. I really want to stress that, and that's where I'm coming from. I have been greatly offended over the last 2 years on being denied information because this place leaks like a sieve, so to speak. So information has been withheld. I remember having a huge debate here only less than a month ago about whether or not we could have access to the Cultural Sector Review report, because some of us wanted to have that information and to be able to have an informed debate on it. And again, we were treated like school children and told, no, you know, you all leak, you can't have it. So the fact that we can't resolve this today is unfortunate, but I think you are wise to counsel us to receive written responses. I would ask that you add to the list of questions that you're going to respond to for going forward, and give us some indication of how the process is going to be for the release of sensitive information in the future. Because as somebody who does not leak information, I have found it to my detriment that I haven't had information when I have wanted it. So I don't want this to be a witch hunt, but I do want it to be a catalyst for having a bit more maturity in the conversation about who receives information and when. Because advance information can often advantage other parties greatly. We all like to have information ahead of time because it enables us to prepare ourselves. So from a democracy services point of view, and as I understand it, you're not going to take independent legal advice on this. You're going to work with our in-house legal counsel, and congratulations on the appointment. This is a responsibility of Stephen Town, and he can delegate through to you, but I would like to know what advice you're going to give us, Mr. Director, on how confidential information will be handled in the future and what sanctions will be put in place for those breaches.
If I can comment, you are shortly to receive a report on Code of Conduct matters, and that is the mechanism for dealing with sanctions. In terms of access to information, there's an ancillary piece of policy work that you will also be receiving that goes to the question of how information's handled. So we will be responding to that question.
I mean, both Councillor Lee and I, from 6 years on the Board of Auckland Transport, had to conduct ourselves with very, very careful, with careful judgment, because often information became available to us before it was available to the rest of the council. And speaking for myself, I acted with the utmost decorum on that, and I think all of us will have privileged information at different times for different reasons because of the positions that we hold around this council table, but there have to be some protocols that will be observed.
I agree, and it goes to the corrosive nature of leaks. It causes resentment and a loss of trust.
Councillor Walker.
Sure. There's 4 or 5 issues I'll just raise with you, some of which I raised earlier. The first one is around context and the organisations that are affected by this. And I'm referring to the Eden Park Trust, which is not owned by the council. And it is an entity that depends for its livelihood on getting people to utilise its facilities. And I would not doubt that it has concerns about this. And you would know that our council has got a contractual relationship with the Eden Park Trust. There's the government, which is also mentioned here, which also has a relationship with the Eden Park Trust. There's Ports of Auckland, which is a substantial entity that's owned by this council, and that's something that has a lot of value, and we get a dividend from Ports of Auckland, and it has to negotiate with various shipping companies and others that use Ports of Auckland. So I guess the context around this is not something that is light, it's relatively heavy, and there are significant elements of risk around going to the media around these areas. Obviously there are substantial areas mentioned here. Victoria Park, which is a publicly owned park. I can't quite recall what the status of that is. And then we also have statements here, and this goes to a request for funding on the part of Eden Park, I'm assuming, or in the instance here, this group, Wigmore, where it says the council has already turned down a request for funding, and I don't know of any vote on council's part around that. The other matter is that we've got consortiums that are approaching us around downtown stadiums and the like, and there's obviously a significant cost that people in this organisation are incurring dealing with those consortiums and others. I don't know how much. Quite obviously this is fueling that. There's the matter of precedent. So if this is what councillors and others are able to do, then well, that's gung-ho, isn't it? It's a bit like somebody putting up an illegal building and then going for a retrospective building consent and getting a sign-off. And frankly, there's too much of that that's going on. So there are a few matters here around context that are substantial. And then the last point I'd make, and it just goes to the relationship with media. I know that if I were to talk with Bernard Orsmond or somebody else and I put something up, his comment to me is, I want to see it. They're not in the habit of just printing something without being able to substantiate it. So I have to make the assumption, based on my interaction with the media, that it's not just a verbal conversation, that there may have been something given to them. Again, I don't know, but I do know that the media have certain principles that they work on, and that's one of them, substantiation.
Anyway, I think that's conjecture. That is conjecture, that last point.
It is conjecture, but it's simply based on
My contrary to my whole experience of life, but never mind.
It's very wise.
The alternative facts, the real facts.
Councillor Casey.
It's a faith-based statement, Wayne.
I rely on you, Mr. Chair, to keep me right, because I realised when Daniel spoke this morning, there's still a very raw seam inside my soul waiting to be resolved about all of this. I'm trying to...
It wasn't me.
What?
It wasn't me, though.
No, when you raised the issue this morning that we're now discussing. See, go ahead. So I will try and maintain my Alfie. Here's what's wrong. Well, first of all, I didn't write any questions to you, Phil, so are you answering my moral questions I raised this morning, or do I need to repeat them again? And I'll repeat them again, because actually this is, for me, the essence of all of this, and why some councillors feel disenfranchised is, and I've spoken to the mayor and said these exact words, the decision about a waterfront stadium, the decision about Western Springs, the decision about Mount Smart, they're all linked, and up to date, some of us have been trying to pretend, not me, that these are independent decisions that bear no relation to anything else. And I think it's about time we realise that it's a set of dominoes that's interlinked, that if one falls, the rest of them will fall. And the biggest domino is Eden Park and the future of Eden Park. And I think that's a decision we need to take before we get 3-hour presentations on the consortium, which is the issue I raised this morning, when we've got other bids that were unknown to me but have now been disclosed in the newspaper. It makes an unfair playing field when the 21 councillors and mayor have had 3 hours with one set of developers and no time, and I've not even seen a word from the other bids. And anyway, who says we need a stadium? So back to the issue. The issue that's raised all the ire here is just that. What's going to happen to Eden Park determines whatever else happens. And where is that on the political agenda? We've had no discussions whatsoever. It's not you, Phil, this is just a general thing. We have had no political discussions. We don't have them. We have them up there over the water cooler or the coffee. When are we having the discussion that's key to all of this, which is the future of Eden Park Stadium? Then we can look at all these other dominoes and decide if we want to shove them over or not. Maybe that's a question through the chair to the mayor.
Yeah, no, it's a question to all of us, and I actually remember you perhaps making exactly the same speech just before you went to Scotland, asking the same question, and my answer was that we have already kicked off the stadium debate, the /Eden Park debate, by virtue of our resolutions and confidential regards the subject you know about. When was that done in May, and I can't say what it was, but it was related. We did in confidential, so I can't tell you what they were. Because we're in open and we're in camera. But the debate has been kicked off.
It hasn't been. It hasn't.
That has triggered.
Forgive me. That was a debate about a date. It wasn't a debate about the future of Eden Park Stadium. I'd like the Eden Park Trust Board there. I'd like the RFA there. I'd like whoever else thinks they're a stakeholder there. I'd like to have that debate.
We are working out how the best way to come back and frame that, and I just emphasise again, we have kicked it off with the Eden Park Trust / the government. Work is happening. We're not...
Have we written to government?
We seem to be going off topic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we are.
Let's-
Well, for
so,
me,
and then
sorry,
I'm just
Richard, for
going
me
to say
it's
the next
central
thing is
to it. It's central to all
you're
of
going
this.
to you're going to again next week the whole saw is going to be opened up again next week on the 20th at a workshop because I'm going to start talking about Speedway.
We
So
can't talk about Speedway if we haven't talked about Eden Park. That's one of the dominoes. It's just the biggest domino still over here standing. And we're not going to knock one of the wee dominoes down because we still haven't knocked over the big one.
Mr. Chair, can I?
Right, as chair, I'm just deciding I'm not going to say anything more because we're getting a bit close to the bone
I
on
have a point of
confidentiality.
order.
Point of order.
My point of order is, and I should quote the number, I haven't got the number in front of me, but reading the briefing for what we are meant to be discussing now, we've had the briefing, we're now turning into a full stadium discussion as we often do. So my point of order is we've strayed entirely from the remit in front of us, and I think that the conversation should probably come to a halt.
Councillor Watson.
recommendation.
No,
Question.
I have got Councillor Watson, Member Typery and Councillor.
Mine's just a procedural question, if I may,
Okay,
first.
yes.
May I?
Procedural.
I just can't work out,
Well, no, and
it
other
was
people
this,
don't.
when I look at the 10.1 and what's been put up there, while this is a Finance and Performance Committee discussion and not the governing body,
Yeah, exactly.
you know, I think the opportunity was taken this morning because of a Finance and Performance Committee meeting scheduled.
Yep.
But I'm actually on Finance and Performance, I'm not on the governing body, and the information, it's up there about leaking about non-disclosure of information. I'm just not sure how relevant it is to finance performance versus being a governing body matter.
Because it got brought up because it was a hot topic.
Well, that's right, but that's a motion, that's not,
It may well, Member Typery, as a matter of process, it may well be coming back to a governing body meeting in confidential.
well, it's quite awkward sitting here.
Yeah, it is.
I move we put the motion.
Oh,
I haven't spoken.
oh, you already
You've
signalled that
already
my speaking.
signalled
I did signal that Councillor Watson, so that can come after Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and I do want to speak to what we're noting up here, and I thank Phil and Anita because I am reassured at the process that you're undertaking and not being rushed into some sort of quick verbal response. The matter is serious enough to consider seriously and to commit to paper. Having said that, what we're discussing today is but a symptom of a far larger malaise, and I'm not sure if that's going to be covered. I'm pretty sure it won't be, but it is important to state it because it is why we find ourselves in this situation here today, and that is the issue to do with the way all of this stadium's business, and I'm not going down the rabbit holes of specific ones, has been handled. And I actually feel a bit of sympathy for the councillor involved here. I actually do, because there has been so much information put out and so little, in fact, no central cohesion, that it's pretty hard to get an idea of who knows what. When I try to go for information, I get it denied. I go to RFA wanting quite reasonably, I thought, to see the Memorandum of Understanding with New Zealand Cricket, which is entirely relevant to the matter that's coming to us on Tuesday. I'm denied that. I know there are other people sitting around here who have seen that memorandum. Now, the instance here of someone, potentially not obliging or following the confidentiality as clearly elucidated any number of times, is indicative of that wider atmosphere where some people know what's going on, other people have absolutely no idea what's going on, and where stories and information is fed in advance to favoured reporters who have big front page stories out before anyone else actually knows what's going on. So as much as you're concentrating on this, and I appreciate that, I would just like to signal as a councillor that the way this whole stadium debacle and its effect on Aucklanders has been disastrous and continues to be disastrous. There's a complete lack of honesty, and as I said, I feel sorry for the particular councillor because that in some ways could be any one of us. but the way it's been handled is deplorable, does the council no good, and certainly does the people of Auckland no good, because most people have very little idea as to what constitutes what's being proposed at any one venue, and which happens to change by the month, quite literally. So I would like to see us, as supposedly the Auckland Council, address that far bigger issue at an appropriate venture too. Perhaps following this report might be the time.
Right. I'm going to move this. Is there a seconder?
I'll second it.
Councillor Cooper.
And
No,
through you,
no,
Mr. Chair.
No, I'm just speaking still, unless it's a point of order.
Well, I'll make it a point of order then, and that's around what we're considering here. It just mentions PwC feasibility report, doesn't give any indication of the name of that report. I just suggest that what we're voting on could be
Okay.
a little bit more explanatory.
Yep. So,
Because PwC have done any number of
what
reports.
what
for
was
us.
it called?
I can't place it offhand.
You can do that in the workshop.
We're getting that. We're getting that because I was actually about to say that certainly I can't be pinged. I mean, I hear the veiled criticism from Councillor Watson of me, and it's fair enough. But I certainly couldn't say anything about the Price Waterhouse report on the stadiums because I haven't read it. I haven't read it redacted or unredacted or whatever, and indeed because I disagreed with it being commissioned. Because I stand again. This is an issue for 2020, 2021. So just make that statement. We have a mover and a seconder. Any other comment? All those in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Against? You councillors, we declare the meeting closed. And we now have...